Patrick Dales didn't think twice when he saw the woman hesitating by her car under the flickering street lamp. He just stepped forward. "You okay?" he asked, adjusting his grip on the grocery bag in his left arm. His right hand was wrapped around his 7-year-old son's small one. The woman looked up, clearly startled. She was tall, elegant, wearing a long beige coat and heels that didn't quite match the back alley parking lot behind the community center. Her eyes, wide and cautious, met his. "I'm fine," she said, though her hand trembled slightly as she fumbled for her keys. Patrick glanced at the alley behind her. It was late. The fall air had turned cold and two guys had just passed them on the sidewalk, laughing too loudly. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Just not used to this area." Patrick nodded. "All right. I'm walking that way anyway. Mind if we walk with you to your car?" He looked down at his son. "This is Wyatt. We just finished his art class." Wyatt gave her a shy wave, clutching his dad's jacket with the other hand. She hesitated, then gave a small smile. "I'm Lila. Thanks." "That's really kind." "No problem," Patrick said, leading the way beside her. "Can't be too careful. This neighborhood's fine during the day, but at night, not so much." Lila chuckled lightly. "I'll make a note of that." As they walked, Wyatt started talking about his clay dragon project, and Lila listened with warm eyes, asking questions that made Patrick glance at her with mild surprise. Most people ignored Wyatt when he rambled, not her. At her car, a sleek black BMW that looked very out of place in this part of town, she turned to them. "Thanks again, both of you," Patrick smiled. "No problem, have a good night." He started to turn, but she paused. "Wait, you live around here?" "Yeah, couple blocks down." "Why?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "I just appreciated that. You didn't know me and still, it's what people should do," he said simply. She nodded, lips curved. "Well, thank you." Lila drove off into the night, and Patrick didn't expect to see her again. He was wrong. The next Saturday, Patrick was behind the snack table at Wyatt's art class when Lila walked in. He blinked. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a soft blue hoodie, still stunning but less intimidating. "Hey," she said, smiling. "Didn't expect to see you here." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you either. I signed up for the adult pottery class. Thought it'd be fun, stress relief." "From what?" he asked, then winced. "Sorry, not my business," she laughed. "No, it's okay. I work in investments, numbers all day," he nodded. "Yeah, I do construction, part-time. The other part I'm with Wyatt." She glanced at Wyatt, who was laughing with another kid while painting a blob of clay red. "You're a good dad." Patrick looked down, a little embarrassed. "I try." "You don't try. You walked a stranger to her car with your kid in tow. That's just rare." Patrick looked at her for a second. "You really okay with this neighborhood?" "I grew up in worse," she said quietly. He didn't press. "Well, you ever need walking again, I'll be around," she smiled. "Maybe I'll take you up on that." Over the next few weeks, they saw each other every Saturday. Lila would sit next to him during Wyatt's class, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. She was surprisingly easy to talk to, even if she sometimes dodged questions about her job or where she lived. Patrick didn't push. He liked the mystery. One Saturday, she brought Wyatt a sketchbook. "I saw this at the store and thought of him," she said, handing it to Patrick. He hesitated. "You didn't have to, I wanted to. He's talented." That night, Wyatt crawled into his lap and said, "Dad, I think Miss Lila is really nice." Patrick looked at his son, then out the window. He didn't know what this thing with Lila was, but he knew he hadn't smiled this much in years. One evening, Lila offered to drive them home. It was raining and Wyatt had forgotten his coat. Patrick agreed, and they sat in her car leather seats, touchscreen, everything glowing softly. "This is fancy," Patrick said, buckling Wyatt in the back. Lila laughed. "It's just a car," he raised an eyebrow. "This isn't just a car." She didn't reply, just turned the heat up and smiled. The next week, Patrick didn't show up. Lila waited through class, then lingered outside. When he still didn't come, she asked the receptionist quietly. "Patrick," he called. Said he couldn't make it. Something about work. She nodded, but something twisted in her chest. That night, she drove by the address she'd seen on Wyatt's emergency form. It was a small 2-bedroom duplex with peeling paint. Through the kitchen window, she saw Patrick helping Wyatt with homework at the table. She didn't stop, but she came back the next day. He opened the door, surprised. "Lila," she held up a paper bag. I brought dinner, hope that's okay. He blinked, then stepped aside. You didn't have to, I wanted to, she said, walking in. Wyatt gasped. You brought food, she laughed. Pizza and garlic knots, your dad said you like those. Patrick watched her as she set the table, laughing with Wyatt, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. She didn't look like a billionaire. But Lila Westwood owned Westwood Ventures, one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the country, and she had no idea why being in Patrick's kitchen made her heart ache in the best way. After Wyatt went to bed, Patrick walked her to her car again. The air was cool and their hands brushed. You didn't have to do all this, he said softly. I know, she said, but I wanted to. He looked at her. Why? She hesitated. Because I like being around you, around Wyatt. Around this. He stared at her for a moment, then whispered, me too. They didn't kiss, but when she drove away, Lila knew she was falling for a man who had no idea who she really was, and she didn't think she wanted to stop. Do you ever sleep? Lila's voice floated across the small backyard as Patrick knelt beside a broken fence post, prying it loose with a crowbar. He looked up, startled, not having heard the gate open. She stood there with a thermos in her hand and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Her jeans were dusted with flour, and there was a faint streak of something white, maybe batter, on her forearm. Depends on the week, he replied, resting back on his heels. Saturday mornings are reserved for fixing what's been falling apart all week. She stepped closer, bending slightly to peer at the cracked wood. And today it's the fence, today it's everything, he said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. Fence, leaky pipe in the kitchen, and the car's making a sound that doesn't sound like anything good. You always do it yourself. Can't afford to call someone every time the sink gurgles. She crouched beside him, examining the splintered post. I could help. You know how to fix a fence. I know how to hand someone tools, she said. And I brought coffee. That made him laugh, the first real laugh she'd heard from him since they met. She handed him the thermos. It was warm, strong, and tasted like cinnamon. By the time they finished replacing the post, Patrick's hands were scraped, and Lila's jeans were smudged with dirt. Wyatt had come out at some point with 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and a stack of napkins, declaring himself the project supervisor. They sat on the back steps to eat, the sun warm against their faces. So, Patrick said after a moment of silence, you ever fix a fence before today? No, she admitted. But I've watched at least 3 videos on it in the last hour. He raised an eyebrow. You watched videos before coming over. I like to be prepared. He leaned back, balancing his sandwich on one knee. You always like this, jumping into things. She looked at him, something thoughtful in her expression. Not usually. I plan, I control every variable I can, but with you. She shook her head, smiling faintly. You make it easy to do things I don't usually do. The wind rustled through the old oak tree in the corner, scattering a few leaves across the lawn. Patrick didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, you ever think about how weird this is? How so? I mean, you're you and I'm me. Our lives don't exactly run in the same circles. Lila tilted her head. Maybe that's the point. That night after she left, Patrick sat outside long after Wyatt had gone to bed. He stared at the fence they'd fixed and the thermos she'd forgotten on the step. He didn't know what this was, but he hadn't felt this unsettled in a long time. Not in a bad way. In a way that made him think something was about to change. The next day, a man showed up at his job site in a tailored navy suit, looking as out of place as a tuxedo in a mud pit. You Patrick Dales. Patrick wiped his hands on his jeans. Yeah, what's this about? The man handed him a letter. You've been selected for a private restoration project in the city. Pays triple your current rate. Transportation provided. You'll be renovating a historical property. Patrick frowned. I didn't apply for anything. The man shrugged. Someone recommended you. He opened the letter later that night at the kitchen table. It was typed on heavy cream paper, the kind that didn't come from any office supply store. He didn't recognize the handwriting at the bottom, but somehow, he knew. Lila. The next time he saw her, he didn't ask. Instead, he said, so this restoration job, you wouldn't happen to know anything about it. She didn't blink. I might. Did you take it? I'm thinking about it. You should. He studied her. Why? She set down the sketchbook Wyatt had asked her to look through. Because it's a real opportunity, and because you don't belong stuck fixing fences for people who can't pay you on time. Neither do you, he said quietly. She looked away, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. Why are you doing this? He asked. She hesitated, then said, because. I want to see what happens when someone like you finally gets a break. He narrowed his eyes. That's not the whole answer. No, she admitted. It's not. She stood, grabbing her coat. We're having a fundraiser Thursday night, art auction. I'd like you to come. I don't own anything close to what I'd need for that kind of thing. I'll take care of it. Thought you weren't into controlling people. I'm not, just giving you the option. He waited. Where is it? She hesitated. The Westwood Foundation building. He stared at her. Westwood, as in? Yes, she didn't elaborate, he didn't ask, but when she left, he sat at the table for a long time, her words echoing. Someone like you deserves a break. He didn't know what would happen Thursday night. But he knew one thing. Lila Westwood wasn't just someone he was getting to know. She was about to change everything. Patrick stood in front of the wide mirror, adjusting the collar of the jacket that had arrived earlier that afternoon in a garment bag embossed with gold initials. He hadn't planned on accepting it, he didn't like being someone's project, but the moment he saw the handwritten note tucked in the pocket, his pride had bent just enough to let him try it on. Wear this. I'd rather you be comfortable than overdressed. He still wasn't sure why he was going. The idea of being surrounded by polished strangers who spent more on wine than he made in a month made his skin itch. But as he glanced at the clock and heard the quiet shuffle of Wyatt playing with his action figures in the other room under the watchful eye of their neighbor, he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to see her. The venue sat on a hill that overlooked the skyline, lit up like a painting. Valais moved with quiet precision, and the building itself was all sweeping glass and marble. Patrick stepped out of the town car also sent by Lila, against his protests, and tried not to feel like an imposter as he climbed the steps. Inside, the lobby buzzed with soft laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of a string quartet. A woman in a gown approached with a clipboard. Mr. Dales. That's me. Miss. Westwood asked that you meet her on the terrace. He followed her through the crowd, past a collection of abstract paintings framed in gold, and out onto a stone balcony strung with tiny lights. The city sprawled beneath them, and at the far end, Lila stood alone, her back to the door. The dress she wore shimmered in the light, but it wasn't the dress that caught him. It was the way she turned when she sensed him, like she'd been waiting. You came, she said, the wind catching her hair. You sent a car, he replied. And a suit. And a schedule, she smiled, but he saw the flicker of nerves in her expression. You clean up better than I expected. Still feels like someone else's skin. It's not. It suits you. He stepped closer, resting his hands on the stone railing. So this is your world, part of it. And the other part, she looked at him, quiet for a beat. The part I don't let most people see, he studied her profile. Why me? Her eyes met his. Because you didn't ask for anything. And because I don't feel like I have to hide when I'm with you. Before Patrick could answer, a man in a gray suit approached. Lila. They're asking about the final bid on the Rothman piece. She nodded, then turned back to Patrick. Will you stay for the auction? I don't exactly have the budget to participate. You don't have to buy anything, just stay. He paused, then nodded. Yeah, I'll stay. The auction room was grander than any place Patrick had ever stepped foot in. Spotlights illuminated each piece, and names he'd only ever seen in magazines were murmured across tables. Lila moved easily through the crowd, exchanging greetings and shaking hands with an effortless poise that made his chest tighten. She belonged here. He didn't. At least, that's what he thought until she returned to him during the intermission, holding 2 glasses of something he couldn't pronounce. There's someone I want you to meet, she said, leading him to a man with silver hair and sharp eyes. This is Conrad Bell. He owns the firm that's overseeing the restoration project. Patrick shook the man's hand, surprised by the firm grip. So you're the one Lila's been talking up, Conrad said. Didn't realize I was being talked up. She thinks you've got vision, that you don't cut corners. That you actually care about the work. Patrick glanced at Lila. She's not wrong, Conrad nodded. That's rare. If you're half as good as she says, we'll have more work for you when this project's done. He left them then, off to speak with another guest. Patrick turned to Lila. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Why? Because I know what it's like to build something from the ground up, and I know what it's like when no one gives you the benefit of the doubt. He studied her, the vulnerability behind her polished exterior. You built all this, she shrugged slightly. My father left me the name. He died when I was 19. Everything else I built myself. I didn't know. I don't tell many people. The lights dimmed again, signaling the next round of bidding. Lila touched his arm. Come with me. They stepped into a quieter room off to the side where a single canvas hung on the wall. It wasn't part of the auction, and it wasn't framed in gold. It was a child's painting bright blues and yellows, wild brushstrokes. My brother painted this when he was 7, she said softly. He passed away the same year. I keep it here because it reminds me not everything has to be perfect to have value. Patrick didn't speak. He just took her hand. Sometimes I think I built all this trying to fill the silence he left behind, she continued. But then I meet someone like you and I realize I don't need to fill it. I just need to let someone in. He turned to her, close now, his voice low. You already have. She blinked, eyes glassy. I don't want this to be temporary. Neither do I. His fingers brushed her jaw, and when he kissed her, it wasn't like the world stopped. It was like everything outside them faded entirely. When they pulled apart, Lila leaned her forehead against his. Come with me tomorrow. I want to show you something. Where? Somewhere that matters, he nodded. Because even though the world she lived in was nothing like his, he was starting to believe they could build something new together. The next morning, Patrick found himself standing in front of a tall iron gate at the edge of the Westwood Arboretum, a private estate, just outside the city that he'd only ever heard about in passing. The air was crisp with early spring, the scent of wet earth and budding trees drifting through the breeze. When the gates opened, Lila was waiting in a cream trench coat and low boots, her hair pulled back neatly, her hands tucked into her pockets. I thought you wanted to show me something, Patrick said, stepping through the gate as it closed behind him. I do, she replied, turning and leading him down a winding gravel path lined with flowering dogwoods. This place belonged to my mother's family. After my father died, I used to come here to think. It's been closed to the public for years. He glanced up at the towering glass conservatory nestled at the heart of the property. It's beautiful. It's quiet. Her voice held something unreadable. I wanted to bring you here before I made a decision. Patrick slowed his steps. What kind of decision? I was offered a position in London. It would mean stepping away from day-to-day operations, but the reach, she paused, then exhaled. It's the kind of opportunity I would have jumped at 2 years ago. He watched her carefully. But now, Lila turned to face him, her eyes steady. Now I wonder if I'd be running from something instead of toward it. Patrick didn't speak right away. The sun filtered through the trees, casting shadows across her face. You don't owe me an explanation for your choices. I know that, she said, but I owe one to myself and maybe to you. He folded his arms. I don't want to be the reason you turn something down. You're not, she said. But you are the reason I'm asking myself what I actually want, not what's expected, not what looks good in a press release, what makes me feel like I'm not pretending. Patrick looked up at the conservatory's glass panels, then back at her. So what do you want? She stepped closer. I want to stop choosing between the life I built and the one I never thought I could have. I want both. And I think maybe I could have both with you. His breath caught in his chest. I've never had anyone say something like that to me. I've never said something like that to anyone. He reached for her hand. So don't go, she nodded, her voice quiet. I won't. Later that afternoon, they returned to the city. Patrick asked the driver to make a stop. Lila didn't question it, just followed him into a narrow brick storefront with a faded awning. Inside, the owner greeted Patrick by name and led them into the back. The space was filled with sketches, half-finished sculptures, and scattered tools. A small canvas sat on an easel in the center, painted in bold, uneven strokes. I wanted you to see where Wyatt comes when he says he's going to work on his masterpiece, Patrick said. The owner lets him come in after school sometimes, helps him learn technique. Lila walked slowly around the room, her eyes landing on each piece. This is where he finds his space, Patrick nodded. He says it feels like the inside of his head. She turned to him. You've done a good job, with him. I try. He hesitated. He's the reason I didn't walk away from you when I first found out who you really were. He told me once that it's okay to believe someone is more than one thing at the same time. Lila smiled faintly. He's wise. Back at the duplex, Wyatt ran to the door when he heard them return. He looked at Lila, then at Patrick with wide eyes. Did she see my painting? She did, Patrick said, ruffling his son's hair. She said it was brilliant. Wyatt beamed and disappeared back into the living room. Lila leaned against the doorframe. I've been thinking. Dangerous, Patrick teased. She gave him a look. About what it would take to turn a small art studio into something bigger, a place where kids like Wyatt could create for free, with real supplies, real instructors. Patrick blinked. You're serious? I am. I want to set it up as a trust. You'd run the renovation, of course, build it from the ground up. He studied her. Why me? Because you don't just fix things, you make them matter. The words settled into him slowly, like roots threading through soil. You're really not leaving, he said. No, she said. I'm staying for this, for you, for what we could build. He stepped toward her, cupping her jaw gently. Then let's build it. Their kiss this time wasn't tentative. It was full of quiet certainty, of shared breath and unspoken promises. Months later, the studio opened on a rainy afternoon to a packed crowd. Wyatt cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, grinning ear to ear. Inside, the walls were filled with student art, the smell of fresh paint mixing with laughter and sunlight. Patrick stood beside Lila, watching as kids swarmed the tables, dipping brushes into jars of color. You did this, he said. No, she replied. We did. He looked at her, the woman who had once seemed so far out of reach, now standing beside him like she'd always belonged there. Marry me, he said suddenly. Lila's eyes widened. What? You heard me. She stared at him, breath caught, then smiled a real smile, radiant and without hesitation. Yes. And just like that, the world they'd built together became their future. One full of color, of laughter, of shared mornings and quiet nights. Of a love that had started in the dark, beneath a flickering street lamp, and grown into something neither of them had seen coming, something they'd never let go. Lila stood at the edge of the gallery's new rooftop garden, the city glowing beneath her like a sea of stars. She wore a deep emerald gown, sleeveless and soft around the edges, her hair swept up with a few loose strands brushing her neck. The grand opening of the Westwood Youth Art Center had drawn supporters, artists, and community leaders alike, but none of it held her attention the way Patrick did. He was leaning against the railing a few feet away, speaking with a young architect who had helped draft the studio's blueprints. Dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like he'd been born into it, Patrick looked calm, grounded, but there was a flicker in his eyes he always saved for her, a quiet heat that never needed words. Lila approached, and Patrick turned toward her before she said a word. I was starting to wonder if you'd disappeared, he said, watching her with that steady gaze that saw straight through the trappings of wealth and polish. I needed a moment, she replied. It's surreal seeing it all come together. He nodded toward the crowd behind them. They came for you. They came for us, she corrected, her hand resting lightly on his. You built the bones, I just found the space. Patrick held her gaze. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked you to your car that night? I do, she said. And I don't think I would have recognized what I needed if you hadn't been so sure of who you were. He brushed a thumb over her knuckles. I wasn't always. I know. That's what makes it real. Across the garden, Wyatt was standing near a table of cupcakes, deep in conversation with a local muralist who had taken him under her wing in recent weeks. Lila watched him gesture animatedly, his whole body moving with excitement. He's different, Patrick said softly. He's blooming, Lila replied. He feels seen. He always was. Now everyone else sees it too. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of comfortable quiet that only existed between people who had weathered storms together. Can I ask you something? Lila's voice was cautious but not uncertain. Anything. If you could do anything now, no limits, no expectations, what would it be? Patrick looked back out at the skyline. I'd buy the building next door. Turn the top floor into apartments for the kids who age out of the system, the bottom half into a sculpture workshop. Lila blinked. You've thought about this. I think about it every time I see one of them linger a little too long after class. Like they don't want to go home. She stepped closer, the hem of her gown brushing his shoes. Then we'll make it happen. He tilted his head. You don't even know the cost, she smiled. I know the value. Inside, the evening wound down. Guests filtered out with warm goodbyes and promises to return. Lila's executive assistant handed her a small envelope, then disappeared into the elevator. What's that? Patrick asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Lila opened it and smiled. The deed to the building next door. My board signed off this morning. I wanted to wait until tonight to tell you. Patrick exhaled, a laugh of disbelief escaping him. You really don't waste time. I've wasted enough of it pretending I didn't need people. She turned to him, her voice lower. I'm done pretending. Good, he said, pulling her in slowly. Because neither of us got here alone. Their kiss was quiet and sure, full of everything they hadn't said out loud but had lived every day since that first walk to her car. 3 months later, the building was theirs. Patrick managed the renovations, hiring some of the older teens from the program to assist in exchange for mentorship hours and experience. The apartments upstairs came together slowly, one at a time, with exposed brick and wide-open windows facing the river. Lila kept her office at the foundation but moved into Patrick's house, despite her assistant's raised eyebrows and gentle suggestions about security and space. She didn't care. She liked the creak in the hallway floor and the way the morning sun hit the kitchen table just right when Wyatt did his homework. One night, Patrick came home to find her barefoot on the back porch, a stack of papers in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. Reading board reports on your night off, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Just skimming, she said. They want to expand to the west side, more kids, more schools. What do you want? She turned in his arms, resting her cheek against his chest. I want to marry you, he froze, then pulled back just enough to see her face. You're serious? I am, she searched his expression. Unless you were planning to ask me again first, I was, he said, but I'll take being outpaced. Good, she whispered. They married in the garden at the youth center, under a canopy of hanging lights and soft spring blooms. Wyatt stood between them, holding both their hands as they said their vows. There were no photographers, no press releases. Just friends, family, and the kids who had painted their futures on the walls they'd built together. Lila wore a simple ivory dress and no shoes. Patrick wore the same suit from the art gala, the one she'd sent him when everything was still uncertain. They danced barefoot in the grass, laughter spilling from their lips as the music played on. By the time the sun set, and Wyatt fell asleep curled in a deck chair with paint on his fingers and frosting on his cheek, Lila sat beside Patrick with her head on his shoulder. I used to think I had to earn love by being perfect, she murmured. Patrick kissed the top of her head. And now I know love is what happens when you stop performing. He looked out over the garden, the home they'd created blooming around them. Then we've got a lifetime of the real thing ahead. They stayed there until the stars brightened and the world went quiet again. Not the silence of loneliness, but the kind that only comes after everything finally falls into place. A life of love, built not from expectation, but from choice. And neither of them would ever walk away from it.